I want you to picture something, just a completely normal scenario. You are having a remarkably normal morning.
Right.
You've got your coffee, the sun is out, your schedule is, manageable, you're feeling good, and then it happens.
Oh, the inevitable shift.
Exactly. You glance at your phone and there's like a one passive-aggressive email from a colleague. Or maybe you get to the station and your train is delayed by 20 minutes, which is, threatening your first meeting.
Yeah.
Almost instantly, you can physically feel a shift. Like your chest tightens, your heart rate elevates. You start replaying the email, drafting angry responses in your head, projecting how the delayed train is going to cascade and just ruin your entire week.
It spirals so
It
quickly.
really does. Before you even realize what has occurred, your entire day has been hijacked by this one variable. And the truly frustrating part, when you zoom out, neither the email nor the train was like an existential threat. I mean, have you ever had a day completely derailed by a single, relatively minor annoyance like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is perhaps the most universal modern experience. The fragility of our baseline equilibrium is just staggering when you really examine it.
Yeah.
It takes almost nothing. I mean, a slight change in the weather, a poorly phrased text message, a traffic jam to completely shatter our internal stability.
Okay, let's unpack this, because for today's deep dive, we are examining a source text that tackles this precise vulnerability, but from thousands of years ago.
Yes.
We are diving into the Bhagavad Gita to explore a very specific concept called Sthitaprajna. Our mission today is to take this ancient spiritual philosophy and, well, translate it into a rigorous, highly practical psychological toolkit for modern life.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the core theme of the material we're analyzing is really a radical redefinition of peace.
How so?
Well, we generally assume peace is the absence of chaos.
Mhm.
We think that if we just, optimize our schedules and avoid difficult people, we'll be calm.
Right, the whole good vibes only mentality.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the text argues that avoiding chaos is biologically and environmentally impossible. True peace, instead, is about maintaining an unshakable inner steadiness when that chaos inevitably strikes.
Wow.
It is the study of how you process the delayed train rather than an attempt to magically ensure trains never run late.
That makes so much sense. And to truly grasp the weight of the steadiness, I think the historical context of where this advice is delivered is vital. Because, when we talk about ancient Eastern philosophy, the immediate mental image is usually like a sage meditating in a silent cave or on a tranquil mountaintop.
Right, very serene.
Yeah, but the actual setting of this text could not be further from that.
No, far from a tranquil mountain. This conversation occurs in Chapter 2 of the Gita, and the setting is literally a chaotic, deafening war zone.
It's intense.
Very. The central figure, Arjuna, is an elite warrior. He is standing in his chariot on the battlefield just moments before the horns blow to signal a massive, catastrophic civil war. He is looking across the battle lines and realizing he is about to fight his own family members, his cousins, and, the mentors who taught him everything he knows.
It is the ultimate high-stakes, high-stress environment. I mean, the psychological pressure is just unimaginable.
The pressure is so immense that it physically and psychologically breaks him.
Yeah.
Right before the battle, Arjuna suffers a catastrophic emotional collapse.
He just shuts down.
Completely. He physically drops his weapon. He sinks to the floor of his chariot, just completely overwhelmed by grief, existential dread, and the fear of the impending outcome. He enters a profound state of paralysis and refuses to act.
Seeing that described as a massive freeze response makes it incredibly relevant. Like, obviously the stakes of a literal battlefield are unique, but the somatic experience of dropping your bow and sinking into the chariot maps perfectly onto, like, severe modern burnout or executive dysfunction.
Oh, excellent.
It's that moment when the pressure at work or the compounding crises in the news just become too heavy and you want to abandon your responsibilities and hide. But, here's where I usually struggle with the traditional advice offered in these high-stress scenarios.
Which is that?
Well, if someone is freezing up under intense pressure, the default cultural response is usually some form of tough love. Why doesn't his guide Krishna just tell him to compartmentalize, grab his bow, and push through it?
That's a great point. This raises an important question, as that push-through mentality is deeply ingrained in us. When we see a colleague or a loved one spiraling, our instinct is to say, just calm down and focus on the task.
Right, just get it done.
But Krishna's approach is far more sophisticated. He recognizes that commanding a panicked nervous system to simply act is futile. You cannot outwork a fundamental psychological collapse.
Yeah, you can't just flip a switch.
Exactly. Instead, he addresses the root cause. He sees that Arjuna's mind is being violently tossed around by his attachment to the outcome and his fear of loss. So to stabilize him, Krishna introduces the framework of Sthitaprajna.
Okay, that brings us back to that central word, Sthitaprajna. How do the mechanics of that translate? Like, what does it actually mean?
We can break it down into its two Sanskrit components. Sthita translates to being steady, rooted, or firmly established, to think of like the deep roots of an old oak tree.
Okay.
And prajna refers to deep intelligence or clear-seeing awareness. Crucially, this isn't about intellectual book knowledge, It is an applied, lived wisdom.
So it's not just knowing a fact, it's living it.
Right. Together, Sthitaprajna describes a person whose wisdom is structurally sound. They have internalized reality so deeply that their internal foundation does not crack when the external environment produces an earthquake.
I love that. And Arjuna, who seems very practically minded in this moment, essentially asks Krishna for a behavioral profile. Like, he wants to know what a person with a steady mind actually looks like in practice.
Yes, he wants specifics.
Yeah. How do they walk? How do they speak? How do they sit? And Krishna's answer introduces what might be the largest barrier for modern audiences trying to engage with mindfulness.
It really is a barrier. It emerges in verse 2.54 and the subsequent passages, where Krishna gets remarkably specific about this behavioral profile. He describes the person of steady wisdom as someone who remains unagitated by sorrow, but also, and this is where people bristle, someone who is not hungry for pleasure.
Yeah, that phrasing immediately triggers a massive misconception. Hearing "not hungry for pleasure" sounds incredibly bleak. It paints a picture of like a cold, stoic robot who forcibly denies themselves any enjoyment in life for the sake of being steady.
The translation often leads to that exact misunderstanding. People equate steadiness with a grim numbness. They assume the philosophy demands a life devoid of joy.
Right, which sounds terrible.
But the text is not advocating for the refusal of pleasure. The critical distinction lies in dependency. It is entirely about experiencing pleasure without becoming structurally dependent on it to maintain your baseline stability.
The best parallel I can think of is how we experience, like, a perfect 75-degree sunny day.
Okay.
When the sun is out, you fully experience it. You go for a walk, you feel the warmth, you genuinely enjoy the beauty of the afternoon, but when you wake up the following morning and it is 50 degrees and pouring rain, you don't suffer a breakdown.
Right, exactly.
You don't feel a deep sense of personal betrayal from the sky. You enjoyed the sun immensely while it was present, but your core emotional stability wasn't anchored to the weather report.
That framing captures the essence perfectly. You fully experience the joy, but your internal foundation doesn't collapse when the external variables inevitably shift. The Sanskrit term underlying this mechanism is vairagya, which is widely translated as detachment.
Detachment, yeah, it's a loaded word.
Unfortunately, yes. The English word detachment carries a heavy cultural bias. It implies apathy, checking out, or, a cold indifference to the people and projects around you.
It sounds like a defense mechanism. Like, if I don't care about anything, nothing can hurt me.
Precisely. But true vairagya operates on a completely different frequency. It's not about a lack of care. It is the absence of clinging.
The absence of clinging, okay.
The source materials use a compelling illustration to map this difference. Consider two parents who have a child taking a monumentally important, highly competitive entrance exam.
Oh, wow. That is about as high stakes as it gets for a parent's nervous system.
Without question. Both parents love this child with equal depth and devotion. However, the first parent has enmeshed their entire sense of self-worth with the outcome of this exam.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Their mood, their ability to sleep, their identity as a successful parent is entirely held hostage by a score on a piece of paper. If the child fails, the parent is psychologically destroyed.
Because the parent's equilibrium is completely reliant on an external metric they can't actually control.
Exactly. Now, the second parent practicing vairagya is fundamentally different. They support the child fiercely, they hire tutors, they desperately hope for success, but their core identity and inner peace are not tethered to the grading of the test.
Oh.
They care deeply, but they do not cling to the specific outcome.
So the crucial takeaway regarding detachment is that it is the practice of releasing the grip rather than losing the care.
Yes.
You can be deeply invested in your career, passionate about your relationships, and engaged with the world, but you refuse to make those external things the sole load-bearing pillars of your mental health.
Because the suffering does not originate from the caring itself. The suffering is generated by the rigid clinging to how things must unfold.
Well, that distinction makes sense intellectually. The practical reality of releasing that grip is, incredibly difficult.
It is the work of a lifetime.
Right. Because to prevent that tight grip, we need to understand the mechanics of how our minds latch on to things in the first place. Like, how do we escalate from simply noticing something we want to spiraling into anxiety when we don't get it?
And this brings us to a sequence in the text that feels like reading a modern psychological diagnostic manual.
You are referencing verses 2.62 and 2.63.
Right. I am. It is a stunningly precise anatomical breakdown of a cognitive downward spiral. Krishna outlines an 8-step chain reaction that details exactly how the human mind loses its steadiness.
Okay, let's reconstruct this chain, because observing the dominoes fall clarifies so much about human behavior. The first step is described simply as dwelling.
Dwelling is the subtle genesis of the spiral. The mind simply lingers on a sense object. It could be a career milestone, a physical possession, or even just a specific way you want your partner to behave. You are just allowing your attention to rest there.
And if you don't interrupt that lingering, I'm assuming that prolonged focus starts to solidify into the second step, which is attachment. You start building a relationship with the idea in your head, kind of integrating it into your expectation.
Yes, exactly. The thought shifts from an observation to a preference. And as that preference intensifies, the third step emerges, which is craving.
Craving.
The attachment morphs into a burning, rigid demand. It's no longer, it would be nice to get this promotion. It becomes, I absolutely must have this promotion to be happy.
At that point, you've set a trap for yourself, because reality rarely aligns perfectly with our rigid demands.
No, it rarely does.
Right. And when that craving inevitably encounters friction, like when you don't get the promotion or the person doesn't text you back, you hit the fourth step, frustration turns the blocked craving into anger.
The temperature dramatically rises. And this is where the text's understanding of neuroscience becomes incredibly apparent. Krishna states that anger immediately generates the fifth step, which is delusion.
The text describes it as anger creating smoke that clouds your judgment. But I really want to dig into the how here. What is the actual mechanism that links anger to a total loss of perspective?
We can map this directly to what modern psychology calls an amygdala hijack.
Oh, right.
When you experience intense anger, your brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. This chemical flood literally restricts access to your prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for rational thought, logic, and long-term planning.
So you're literally not thinking straight.
Biologically, you cannot. You are reduced to a state of survival, which profoundly warps your perception of reality. You become deluded, seeing threats and slights where there are none.
Which leads directly into the sixth step, confused memory. When the prefrontal cortex goes dark, you don't just forget where your keys are, you lose access to your own guiding principles. You forget the lessons you've learned from past mistakes. You forget your core values because the emotional flooding is just drowning out everything else.
The continuity of your character is fractured.
Yeah.
Because your memory and values are offline, the seventh step is inevitable, the collapse of reasoning. Your intellect fundamentally fails. You are operating purely on reactive impulse.
And the final, eighth step is the chilling conclusion. When reasoning collapses, the person is destroyed. Applying this thousands of years old framework to something like navigating a high-stakes corporate environment is sobering. It perfectly articulates why smart, capable people self-destruct.
The pattern recognition is flawless.
You can see it happen in real time. Someone is dwelling on how a project should run. They get attached to their specific vision. That turns into a craving for control.
Right.
A colleague pushes back, blocking the craving. Anger spikes. The amygdala hijacks the brain, creating a delusion that the colleague is actively trying to sabotage their career.
It happens every day.
It does. The confused memory makes them forget that they actually need this colleague's expertise. Their reasoning collapses, and they send a toxic, career-ending email at 2 in the morning. Their peace of mind and perhaps their professional reputation is destroyed.
What's fascinating here is that the scale of the trigger does not change the sequence of the chain reaction.
Wait, really?
Truly, the biological and psychological cascade is identical, whether you are facing an epic battlefield, a failing marriage, or you're just stuck in a loop of comparison while scrolling through social media. Dwelling, attachment, craving, anger, delusion, confused memory, collapsed reasoning, destruction.
That is terrifying.
The profound danger is that most of us remain entirely unaware of this sequence until we hit the anger or delusion stage. at which point the momentum is nearly impossible to arrest.
So if the danger is that chain reaction, the only real defense is catching it early. We have to figure out how to stop the dominoes. To illustrate how to protect ourselves, the text offers two vivid metaphors. The first one involves a tortoise.
Found in verse 2.58, Krishna suggests that a person of steady mind operates much like a tortoise that can withdraw its limbs into its shell when faced with chaos.
I'll admit, this analogy often receives pushback. When people hear withdraw into a shell, it can sound like an endorsement of avoidance. Does building a steady mind really mean we just retreat and check out whenever the environment gets demanding?
That interpretation fundamentally misreads the biology of the animal and the intention of the text. A tortoise does not live its entire existence paralyzed inside its shell. It moves, it seeks food, it interacts with its ecosystem. However, when it senses an overwhelming threat, it possesses the capacity to draw its sensitive limbs inward. The operative concept here is intentional capacity. A person with Sthitaprajna has developed the deliberate ability to disengage their senses from overstimulating or toxic external inputs.
It is about sensory boundary setting. You aren't hiding permanently. You are recognizing an environment is no longer productive, and you are choosing not to feed it your energy.
Precisely. You utilize the inner mechanism to pull back and protect your cognitive core, rather than being forced to react to every single stimulus that demands your attention.
The second analogy shifts the perspective entirely, focusing on vulnerability. The text compares the human mind to a boat.
In verse 2.67, Krishna envisions the mind as a ship navigating the waters of life. The sensory inputs are various desires, impulses, and reactions, or the elements. The warning is stark. If even one single, wild, ungoverned sense is allowed to take the helm, it acts as a violent gale-force wind. It does not matter how robustly the rest of the ship is built. That singular, unchecked wind is capable of blowing the entire vessel off course and into the rocks.
The precision of that metaphor is staggering because it highlights how a systemic vulnerability works. You don't need your entire life to fall apart to lose your peace of mind.
No, you don't.
You could have your finances in order, a healthy diet, and a great exercise routine. But if you have an unexamined, explosive temper or a deep-seated need for external validation, that single vulnerability will constantly sabotage your stability.
A singular, unmanaged variable can unravel a wealth of discipline.
So understanding these concepts, the 8-step spiral, the boundary setting of the tortoise, and the vulnerabilities of the boat, how do we operationalize this? We aren't sitting in philosophy seminars. We are navigating stressful jobs and complex relationships. How do we actually build this muscle of steadiness?
The transition from theory to practice requires applying these metaphors directly to our behavioral habits. Based on the text, the most critical intervention point is the very beginning of that psychological spiral. We must develop the mindfulness to catch the dwelling stage before it solidifies.
You have to notice the lingering before it becomes an attachment.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a micro moment where your mind is just resting on a frustration, replaying a perceived slight, or fixating on an anxiety about the future. If you can train your awareness to flag that moment, to simply label it, I am dwelling on this right now, you regain the agency to redirect your focus.
Wow.
It is exponentially easier to step off the train before it gathers speed than to try and jump off once it is careening out of control.
So building awareness of the dwelling is the first defense. But how do we practice the tortoise? How do we build that capacity for intentional withdrawal in a modern context? I imagine it requires more than just putting your phone in a drawer for an hour.
Building the capacity for withdrawal requires establishing low-stakes boundaries to train your nervous system for high-stakes moments. For example, enforcing a strict boundary on work communications after 6 p.m.
Okay, yeah.
The emails are still in your inbox, the chaos is still there, but you're voluntarily withdrawing your attention from them until the morning. Or, in a more active scenario, you are in a tense meeting and someone makes a provocative, passive-aggressive comment. The urge is to immediately defend yourself, to snap back.
Oh, wait.
Practicing the tortoise means taking a deliberate, measured pause. You let the comment hang in the air. You withdraw the impulse to react instantly, proving to your nervous system that you are not compelled to respond to every piece of bait thrown your way.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when we apply the boat analogy to our daily practice, it actually takes a tremendous amount of pressure off.
How so?
Well, we often feel like we have to be perfectly disciplined in every aspect of our lives, which is exhausting. But the boat analogy suggests you don't have to fix everything. You just have to identify your specific wind.
Yes. The identification of your primary trigger is the most efficient use of your psychological energy. Everyone possesses a specific, recurring vulnerability that tends to blow their equilibrium off course. For some professionals, it is a paralyzing fear of failure. For others, it is a trap of social comparison or an ego that demands constant consensus and approval.
You just have to analyze your past reactions and figure out what your specific wind is. Once you map that vulnerability, you don't have to constantly scan the entire horizon. You just keep an eye out for that one specific storm.
That focused awareness is the bedrock of the practice, and it is crucial to temper our expectations here. Sthitaprajna, developing a steady mind, is not a destination you arrive at permanently.
It's not a switch you flip.
No, it is a vigilant, daily practice of course correction. Even the most seasoned practitioners get blown off course by their specific winds. You will inevitably fail. You will lose your temper. You will get caught in the spiral.
Right, we're human.
Exactly. The mastery lies entirely in how quickly you notice the deviation and steer the boat back to center.
So what does this all mean? As we synthesize this ancient framework for a modern mindset, it means that our baseline assumption about peace has been fundamentally backward. We spend so much energy trying to curate a world without friction, which is a game we are guaranteed to lose. True peace is the internal engineering that allows you to encounter that friction without collapsing.
Perfectly said.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to examine on your own, building directly on the mechanics we've explored today. Look closely at the most persistent, recurring frustration currently operating in your life. Run it through that 8-step chain reaction. Which specific link in that chain is currently holding your peace of mind hostage? Are you stuck in the dwelling phase, endlessly replaying a conversation? Have you moved into craving, demanding that a situation resolve exactly how you want it to? Or are you already in the anger phase, feeling the heat rise? Remember, you don't have to control the external variables to regain your stability. Once you identify the specific link in your own mind, you hold the power to break it. Catch the spiral early and steady the ship.